Hello and welcome back to her revenge arc. My name is Alara, and I am the voice you hear each week. This is a space for stories. Stories about promises broken, lines crossed, and the quiet, meticulous journey of reclaiming what was taken. The tales we share here are not born of explosive anger, but of a cold, clear-eyed resolve. They are about the moment a woman decides she will no longer be a victim of someone else's narrative, and instead, begins to write her own ending. The story I am about to tell you is my own. It is a story about the ghost of a friendship, the glittering illusion of a life lived online, and the undeniable power of a well-kept archive. It's about how the very tools one person used to build a fortress of lies became the keys I used to unlock its doors and expose the emptiness within. So find a comfortable place, pour yourself a drink if you wish, and listen. Let the quiet hum of the world fade away, and step into my memory. This is the story of how I used Instagram to serve justice, one perfectly curated photograph at a time. Friendship, in its purest form, is a kind of architecture. You don't build it in a day. It is laid brick by brick, memory by memory over years. Each shared secret is a reinforcing beam. Each moment of vulnerability a window letting in the light. The friendship I shared with Chloe was, I thought, a cathedral. It was vast and resonant, built over 15 years of our lives, from the awkward uncertainty of our late teens to the supposed wisdom of our early 30s. I met her in a university literature seminar. I was quiet, an observer by nature, the kind of person who preferred the company of books to boisterous crowds. My world was one of carefully catalogued thoughts and neatly organized shelves. I found comfort in order, in the logic of systems. Chloe was the opposite. She was a supernova. She didn't walk into a room. She burst into it, all bright laughter and kinetic energy. She was chaos, but a beautiful magnetic kind of chaos that drew people in. And for some reason, she was drawn to my quiet gravity. "You think too much," she'd tell me, tapping my forehead as I pored over a dense theoretical text. "Come on, Alara. The world is out there. Not in these dusty pages." She was the one who dragged me to my first real party, who taught me how to pretend I liked beer, who held my hand while I navigated my first serious heartbreak. In return, I was her anchor. I was the one who proofread her essays at 3 in the morning, fueled by coffee and a fierce loyalty. I was the one who sat with her in silence when her parents' fighting became too much, offering no solutions, just a steady presence. I organized her chaotic moving boxes, created budgets she would promptly ignore, and listened, always, to the grand tapestry of her dreams. She wanted to be a designer, an artist, an influencer, an entrepreneur. The titles changed, but the core ambition was always the same: to live a life that was beautiful and seen. Our foundation was solid, I believed. We had seen each other at our most unvarnished. I had seen her cry until her face was swollen and blotchy over a failed romance. She had seen me paralyzed with anxiety before a major academic presentation. These were the bricks. The mortar was the endless late-night phone calls, the inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else, the unspoken understanding that passed between us in a single glance across a crowded room. We had a history, a shared language. When her grandmother passed away, I was the first person she called. When I was offered my dream job as a research archivist at a prestigious city library, she was the one who showed up at my door with a bottle of champagne, screaming with more excitement than I could even muster for myself. That job was the culmination of everything I'd ever worked for. It was a quiet job, a solitary one, which suited me perfectly. My days were spent in the hushed, climate-controlled silence of the library's special collections, surrounded by centuries-old documents and forgotten histories. I handled delicate manuscripts, preserved fragile photographs, and found a deep, abiding satisfaction in bringing order to the past. It was a stable job with a good salary. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable. I lived simply, saved diligently, and for the first time in my life I had a significant nest egg. It was a safety net I had woven for myself, thread by careful thread. It represented security, independence, and the quiet pride of self-sufficiency. I never imagined it would become the bait in a trap set by my closest friend. The change in Chloe was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It was like a subtle shift in the climate. The air just felt different. In our late 20s, the pressures of the world began to press in on us in different ways. While I found my footing in my career, she seemed to drift. Her dreams, once vibrant and exciting, began to sound more like desperate aspirations. She bounced from one freelance gig to another: graphic design, social media management, event planning, but nothing ever seemed to stick. The frustration began to curdle into something else, something I would later recognize as a deep and corrosive envy. "It must be nice," she said to me one evening, swirling the wine in her glass as we sat in my small but cozy apartment, "to just know, to have your path all laid out. A steady paycheck. Pension. It's so safe." The way she said safe made it sound like an insult, a synonym for boring. I remember feeling a prickle of defensiveness. My safety was hard-won. It was the product of discipline and sacrifice. But I didn't say that. I just smiled and said, "It has its moments." Her online presence began to change, too. In the early days, her social media was like her. Spontaneous, messy, and authentic. It was full of blurry photos from nights out, unflattering selfies with me, and rants about bad dates. But slowly it transformed. It became curated, polished. Every photo was perfectly lit and artfully composed. There were brunches at trendy cafes she couldn't really afford, clothes from brands I knew were beyond her budget, and captions filled with inspirational quotes about hustling and building an empire. It was a performance, and the dissonance between the life she was projecting online and the reality I knew, the reality of her frequent complaints about unpaid invoices and difficult clients, was growing. I tried to talk to her about it once, gently. "This photo from the brunch at the Gilded Sparrow is beautiful," I said, scrolling through her feed. "But isn't that place incredibly expensive?" She became defensive, her smile tightening. "You have to spend money to make money, Alara. It's about branding. People need to see you as successful to want to work with you. You wouldn't understand. Your world is so different." There it was again. That subtle dismissal. My world, the world of substance and stability, was being framed as a liability. A quaint little village she had long since left for the big city of ambition. Our conversations became more and more superficial. We talked about her brand, her aesthetic, her follower count. We stopped talking about her fears, her doubts, her heart. The architect of our friendship had become an interior decorator, concerned only with the surface, forgetting the structural integrity of what lay beneath. The cathedral we had built was still standing, but I was beginning to hear the faint, ominous sound of cracking in the walls. I just didn't want to believe what it meant. I chose to believe in the 15 years of history, in the girl who had held my hand, in the foundation we had laid. It was a foolish, sentimental choice, and one that would cost me dearly. The call came on a Tuesday night in November. The kind of cold, rainy night that makes the world feel small and enclosed. I was curled up on my sofa with the book and a cup of tea, reveling in the quiet. When my phone rang and Chloe's name flashed on the screen, my first feeling was a small flutter of warmth. We hadn't spoken in a couple of weeks, our communication having dwindled to a few exchanged likes on social media. "Alara." Her voice was thin, reedy, and choked with a sound I knew instantly. Barely suppressed panic. It was the same voice she'd used when she called me after crashing her first car in college. It bypassed all my recent reservations and went straight for the 15 years of loyalty hardwired into my soul. "Chloe? What's wrong? Are you okay?" I sat up, my book forgotten on the cushions. A sob broke through. "No. I'm not okay. I'm so not okay." The story tumbled out of her in a frantic, disjointed rush. It was a masterpiece of narrative construction, designed to hit every one of my soft spots. She'd landed a huge project, she said. A massive branding deal with a new boutique hotel. It was the break she'd been waiting for. The thing that would finally launch her career into the stratosphere. She'd invested everything into it, hiring a team, buying equipment, paying for deposits. It was a fake-it-till-you-make-it situation, she explained, a calculated risk. But now the client was having cash flow problems. Their payment, the one she was counting on to cover all her expenses, was delayed. Not canceled, she emphasized, just delayed by a few weeks. "But the people I hired, Alara, they need to be paid. The rental company for the camera gear is going to take me to court. I'm going to be blacklisted." My reputation will be ruined before it even begins. Everything I've worked for, it's all going to collapse. Her words painted a vivid picture of a young woman on the brink, a dreamer whose only crime was daring to dream big. She sounded desperate, cornered, and utterly terrified. I could almost see her, pacing in her small apartment, her hands twisting together, the carefully constructed facade of her Instagram life crumbling around her. "How much do you need?" I asked, my voice soft. My heart ached for her. This was the Chloe I knew, the one who bit off more than she could chew, whose passion always outstripped her planning. She hesitated, and then the number came out in a whisper. $50,000. The amount was like a physical blow. It sucked the air out of my lungs. $50,000. It was almost everything I had. It was my emergency fund, my travel dreams, my down payment on a future I hadn't even fully imagined yet. It was the tangible result of years of saying no to frivolous things, of packing my own lunch, of mending clothes instead of buying new ones. It was my security. I was silent for a long moment, the rain lashing against my window pane. Every logical fiber of my being, the archivist in me who valued order and tangible proof, screamed no. It was too much. It was too risky. I remembered the subtle dismissals, the curated life, the feeling that we were drifting apart. But then I heard another sob on the other end of the line, a raw, broken sound. And I remembered a different Chloe. The Chloe who sat with me for 12 straight hours in a hospital waiting room when my father had a health scare. The Chloe who used her last $20 to buy us pizza after I'd been laid off from a part-time college job. The Chloe who had been, for more than half my life, my person. How do you put a price on that history? "It's just for a few weeks, Alara, I swear on my life," she pleaded, her voice thick with tears. "The client is solid, they've signed the contract. The wire transfer is just caught up in some international banking nonsense. As soon as it clears, you will be the very first person I pay back. I'll even pay you back with interest for your trouble. Please. You're the only person I can turn to." Her words, "You're the only person I can turn to," were the final fatal blow to my defenses. It made me feel needed, trusted, essential. It reaffirmed the bond one was so afraid was fraying. I was her anchor, her safe harbor in the storm. How could I turn her away? To refuse would feel like a betrayal of our entire friendship, a declaration that I no longer believed in her. "Okay," I said, the word feeling strange and momentous in my mouth. "Okay, Chloe. I'll help you." The relief in her voice was a palpable thing, a wave of warmth that washed away my immediate anxieties. She wept, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She called me her savior, her angel. She promised to draw up a formal loan agreement to sign anything I wanted. In my foolish, sentimental state, I waved it away. "We don't need that," I said. "I trust you." A contract between us felt like a profanity, a desecration of the sacred trust we shared. We were more than that. We were history. The next morning I went to my bank. The teller, a kind woman with silver hair, looked concerned as I arranged the transfer. "That's a very large sum, dear," she said gently. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" I smiled, a tight, reassuring smile that felt like a lie. "It's for my best friend," I said, as if that explained everything. As if that was a shield against all possible risk. I watched the numbers drain from my account. A decade of careful planning vanishing in a single transaction. I sent Chloe a screenshot of the confirmation. Her reply was immediate. A string of heart emojis and effusive thanks. "You've saved my life, Alara. I will never ever forget this. I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't call the next day. Or the day after. The first week was easy to explain away. She was busy, I told myself. She was putting out fires, managing her project, dealing with the stress of it all. She was probably exhausted. I sent her a text. "Hope everything is calming down. Let me know if you need anything." A few hours later, a reply. "Things are still crazy. Thanks again for everything. Talk soon. Hugs and kisses." It was brief, a little distant, but it was enough to quell the tiny seed of unease that had begun to sprout in the pit of my stomach. I gave her space. I understood pressure. I understood being overwhelmed. Our friendship was strong enough to withstand a little silence. The second week, the silence grew louder. I called her once on a Thursday evening. It went straight to voicemail. That was unusual. Chloe's phone was a permanent extension of her hand. I left a message. Hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Give me a call when you get a chance. The call never came. By the end of the third week, the seed of unease had grown into a thorny vine, wrapping itself around my ribs. This was no longer just giving her space. This was avoidance. My texts were now met with complete silence. They sat there in my phone, a string of unanswered blue bubbles, each one a testament to my growing anxiety. The delivered receipt under each message was a small, cold confirmation that the message had arrived in a place where it was being actively ignored. I started to feel a fool. The kind, logical voice of the bank teller echoed in my mind. The memory of my own cavalier dismissal of a formal contract made my cheeks burn with shame. I had let 15 years of sentimentality completely override my common sense. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe something had gone terribly wrong with the project. Maybe she was too ashamed to tell me that the client had pulled out entirely and the money was gone. If that were the case, as devastating as it would be, I could handle it. I would be hurt, I would be in a difficult financial position, but I would want to help her through it. The money was one thing, but the silence was another. It was the silence that was eating away at me, corroding the very foundations of what I believed our friendship to be. At the start of the fourth week, the week she had promised, sworn on her life, that the client's payment would clear, I was a mess of anxiety. I couldn't focus at work. The quiet, orderly world of the archives felt like a mockery of the chaos in my own head. I would stare at centuries-old letters, at the elegant, looping script of people long dead, and all I could think about was the blunt, brutal emptiness of my unanswered texts. I decided I had to go to her apartment. This couldn't be resolved over the phone. I needed to see her face. I needed to look her in the eye and understand what was happening. On a crisp, cold Saturday morning, I drove to the familiar street, my stomach churning. I rehearsed what I would say. I wouldn't be angry. I would be concerned. I would be the supportive friend she had always known. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, my heart pounding with each step. I knocked on the door. I heard no sound from within. I knocked again, louder this time. Chloe? It's me, Alara. Silence. I tried the handle. It was locked. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening for any sign of Lithia television, footsteps, anything. There was nothing. Just the deep, profound silence of an empty space. A wave of dread, cold and sickening, washed over me. Had something happened to her? Was she hurt? My anger and suspicion were instantly replaced by fear. I rushed downstairs and found the building's superintendent, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, sweeping the lobby. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I'm looking for Chloe Peterson in 3B. I can't seem to reach her, and I'm worried. He stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom, giving me a weary look. Oh, the designer girl, he grunted. She's gone. Gone. I repeated, the word feeling hollow. What do you mean gone? Gone where? Moved out, he said, shrugging. About 2 weeks ago. Middle of the night, almost. Had a moving van, loaded up all her stuff. Didn't even say goodbye. Just left the keys in the mailbox with a note saying she was breaking her lease. Owed me for the last month's rent, too. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Moved out. 2 weeks ago. She had moved out a week after I gave her the money. While I was sitting at home, telling myself she was just busy, she was packing her life into boxes and disappearing into the night. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The sob story, the vague details about the client, the desperate timeline, the refusal to sign a contract, the gradual pulling away, followed by the complete and utter silence. It hadn't been a series of unfortunate events. It had been a plan. A cold, calculated, and exquisitely cruel plan. I stood there in the lobby, the smell of dust and industrial cleaner filling my lungs, and I felt the 15 years of our friendship collapse into dust. It wasn't a cathedral that had been slowly cracking. It was a stage set, a beautiful facade with nothing behind it. And I, the loyal friend, the anchor, the safe harbor, had been the final mark. She hadn't just taken my money. She had taken our history and sold it for $50,000. The ghosting was complete. Chloe Peterson had vanished from my life, leaving behind nothing but a gaping hole where my savings and my trust in humanity used to be. The weeks that followed Chloe's disappearance were a study in gray. The world seemed to have lost its color, its vibrancy muted by a thick fog of betrayal. I moved through my days like an automaton. I went to work. I handled the fragile artifacts of other people's lives with a care I could no longer muster for my own. I came home to my quiet apartment, and the silence that had once been a comfort now felt like an accusation. It was the sound of my own foolishness echoing back at me. I cycled through the stages of grief, but they were distorted, warped by the nature of the loss. There was denial, a persistent, nagging voice in my head that tried to invent scenarios where this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe she'd been threatened. Maybe she was in some kind of trouble and her disappearance was for her own protection. I would cling to these flimsy narratives for a few hours, until the cold, hard logic of the situation reasserted itself. She didn't just disappear. She took $50,000 with her. Then came the anger. It wasn't a hot, explosive rage, but a slow-burning, acidic fire in my gut. I was angry at her for her breathtaking cruelty, for her ability to look me in the eye, to cry manufactured tears, and to dismantle my life for her own selfish gain. But mostly I was angry at myself. I, Alara, the careful archivist, the person who triple-checked every source and cross-referenced every fact. I, who could spot a forged document from the 18th century, had been unable to spot a lie in the face of my best friend. My professional skills, my very identity felt like a joke. I had been played, and my own trusting nature had been the instrument of my downfall. I told no one. The shame was too great. How could I explain to my parents that I had given away my life savings with no legal protection? How could I admit to my few other friends that the person I had always championed as my closest confidant was a con artist? The secret festered inside me, isolating me. I dodged questions about Chloe, offering vague, non-committal answers. Oh, she's busy with a big project. I'd say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Sleep offered little respite. I would lie awake for hours replaying every conversation, every shared memory, searching for the clues I had missed. Was the friendship ever real? Or was I just a long con? A resource she had been cultivating for years, waiting for the right moment to cash in? The thought was poison. It threatened to retroactively contaminate every good memory we had ever shared, turning them all into part of the lie. The trip we took to the coast after graduation, the nights we spent dreaming up our futures, the way she made me laugh until I cried, was all of it a performance? One night, about 2 months after she vanished, I found myself aimlessly scrolling through my phone, a mindless habit to numb the endless whirring of my thoughts. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I rarely used it for anything other than keeping up with a few distant relatives and, formerly, Chloe. I hadn't opened it since the day I realized she was gone. The thought of seeing her old posts, the ones from our life before the lie, was too painful. But that night something compelled me. A morbid curiosity. A need for something. I didn't know what. I opened the app. Her old account, the one I followed, was gone. User not found. Of course. She had blocked me and then deleted the account, erasing her digital footprint as thoroughly as her physical one. It was another dead end. Another confirmation of her intent. I felt a familiar wave of defeat wash over me. I was about to close the app, but then a thought surfaced. A small, logical archivist thought. She had vanished from my life, but Chloe was not the kind of person to vanish from the world. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being seen. She thrived on attention, on admiration. She couldn't survive without an audience. She hadn't deleted her online presence. She had just curated me out of it. My fingers started to move with a newfound purpose. I went to the search bar. I didn't search for her name. That would be too obvious. I started searching for hashtags I knew she loved. Boho chic, gypsy soul, wanderlust, digital nomad. I scrolled through the endless river of images, a sea of filtered sunsets and artfully arranged smoothie bowls. It was hopeless. Then I remembered something she had said once, laughing, during one of our last good conversations. She was talking about her brand, and she'd said, "I need a name that sounds like me. Something free and a little bit magical. Like the Gilded Wanderer." At the time I had rolled my eyes. It sounded so pretentious. But now it was a clue. My heart began to beat a little faster. I typed it into the search bar. The Gilded Wanderer. And there it was. The profile picture was of a woman from behind, her face unseen, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and looking out over a turquoise ocean. But I knew that hair. I knew the line of those shoulders. The bio read, Chloe V, designer and dream chaser weaving a beautiful life, one adventure at a time. Currently in Bali. Bali. The word hit me with the force of a physical impact. Bali. She wasn't hiding in a dingy apartment, consumed with guilt. She wasn't struggling to get by after a failed business venture. She was in Bali. My hand was trembling as I tapped on the profile. It was public. Of course it was public. A brand needs to be seen. And what I saw made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a fantasy. A sun-drenched, professionally photographed, exquisitely curated fantasy. And it was all paid for with my money. The first photo was dated 6 weeks prior, just 2 weeks after she had disappeared. It was a picture of her smiling radiantly, sitting on a plush sofa in what looked like a luxury villa. She was holding a coconut with a straw in it. The caption read, "Took a leap of faith. Quit the 9-to-5 grind and decided to follow my heart all the way to paradise. Sometimes the biggest risks have the most beautiful rewards. Bali life, follow your dreams, blessed." I scrolled. There was a photo of her in a flowing white dress on a black sand beach. A video of her laughing as she rode a scooter through lush green rice paddies. A picture of an elaborate brunch spread, exotic fruits, smoothie bowls, artisanal coffee with the caption, "Mornings like these." There were shots of her in an infinity pool overlooking a jungle canopy, her arms outstretched as if to embrace the world. There were photos of her with a new group of friends, all of them beautiful, sun-kissed, and carefree. They were doing yoga at sunrise, attending sound baths, shopping at local artisan markets for silver jewelry and silk sarongs. Each photo was a dagger. Each cheerful, inspirational caption was a twist of the knife. This wasn't just a vacation. This was the construction of a whole new identity. She had shed her old life and me along with it, like a snake shedding its skin. She had taken my carefully saved security, my symbol of a safe and ordered life, and transformed it into a playground for her gilded wandering. The irony was so profound it was nauseating. My safe and boring money was funding her life of adventure and risk. I felt a strange sense of detachment, the way an archivist feels when handling a particularly damning piece of evidence. The hot, messy anger began to cool and solidify into something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. I was no longer a grieving friend. I was a researcher. This Instagram account wasn't just a painful reminder of her betrayal. It was a record. A detailed, time-stamped, geotagged record of her fraud. She thought she had vanished without a trace. She thought she was safe, hidden behind a new name and a new life halfway across the world. But she had made one critical narcissistic error. She couldn't resist showing off. Her need to be seen, to be admired, the very character trait that had driven her to this point, was now her greatest vulnerability. I sat there in the dark of my apartment, the glow of the phone illuminating my face. The fog of grief began to lift, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The path forward was no longer shrouded in gray. It was a straight, clear line. She had built her new life out of digital images and empty words. And I, the quiet woman who lived in a world of facts and evidence, would use those very images to tear it all down. I took a screenshot of the first photo, and the second, and the third. My work had begun. The Gilded Wanderer had no idea, but the archivist was now on the case. And I am nothing if not meticulous. The days that followed my discovery of Chloe's new life as the Gilded Wanderer were transformative. The helpless victim who had been wallowing in shame and grief was gone. In her place stood the archivist, a woman with a purpose. My personal pain, while still present, was now channeled into a cold, methodical focus. My apartment, once a container for my sorrow, became a war room. My quiet, orderly skills, which I had previously seen as a weakness, were about to become my greatest weapon. I began my work not with rage, but with the systematic precision I applied to my job at the library. The first step in archiving any collection is assessment. I needed to understand the full scope of the material. I spent hours, days meticulously going through every single post on the Gilded Wanderer account. I didn't just look, I analyzed. I read every caption, every comment. I noted the hashtags. I paid attention to the other people tagged in her photos, her new glamorous friends. I clicked on their profiles, building a map of her new social circle. Chloe, in her arrogance, had made it easy for me. She was a prolific documentarian of her own lavish lifestyle. There were photos of her dining at Semignac's most expensive restaurants. I looked up the menus and their prices online. There were posts from a multi-day wellness retreat. At a 5-star resort, a quick search revealed the retreat cost upwards of $5,000. There was the villa with the infinity pool. I used the geotag and a few architectural details to identify the exact rental property on a luxury booking site. It cost $400 a night. As I compiled this information, I created a spreadsheet. It was a thing of beauty, a testament to my organizational instincts. I had columns for the date of the post, the location, a description of the activity, the estimated cost, and a direct quote from the caption. In one column I'd have, date December 10th, activity, shopping for custom-made silver jewelry at John Hardy Workshop, caption, investing in timeless pieces that tell a story, Sparkles artisan-made treat yourself. In the next column, I'd have my own private note. Approximate 25 days after I transferred her $50,000 for a supposed business emergency. This spreadsheet became my ledger of lies. Each row was a new betrayal, quantified and categorized. The photo of her getting a designer handbag for her Baliversary was juxtaposed with the memory of her crying on the phone, claiming she couldn't afford to pay her graphic designers. The video of her popping a bottle of champagne on a yacht at sunset was a direct mockery of the story she'd spun about her reputation being on the line. The second step of archiving is preservation. I couldn't risk her deleting the account or making it private once she caught wind of what was coming. I couldn't just rely on screenshots which could be disputed. I needed irrefutable proof. I researched software that could download entire Instagram profiles, every photo, every video, and most importantly, the associated metadata. The metadata was the key. It contained the digital fingerprint of the post, the time it was uploaded, the GPS coordinates if they were enabled, the type of device used. It was the 21st century equivalent of a postmark and a signature. I paid for the best software I could find and initiated the download. As the files transferred to my encrypted hard drive, I felt a grim satisfaction. She was building her fantasy world in the clouds, on a server somewhere in Silicon Valley. I was pulling it down to earth, turning her ephemeral boasts into hard, undeniable evidence. I created multiple backups. One on the hard drive, one on a separate USB stick that I kept in a fireproof box, and another on a secure cloud server of my own. I was creating an archive of her deception that was far more permanent than the fleeting nature of a social media feed. Alongside this digital collection, I began to build a narrative file. This was my case file, the story I would eventually present. I wrote down my own recollection of the phone call, in as much detail as I could remember. I documented the date, the time, the exact lies she told me. I described her tone of voice, the words she used: savior, angel, I swear on my life. I printed out my bank statement, the clear, unambiguous record of the $50,000 transfer from my account to hers. I took screenshots of our last text message conversations, me increasingly worried messages met with her brief, dismissive reply, and then the deafening silence. I placed the printout of my bank statement next to a glossy, high-resolution printout of her sipping a cocktail in her infinity pool. The contrast was stark, obscene. On one side was my reality, the stark black and white numbers representing years of discipline and sacrifice. On the other side was her fantasy, a riot of tropical color, paid for by those very numbers. This simple, powerful juxtaposition would become the centerpiece of my argument. This process took weeks. I became a creature of the night. My job at the library was my cover. By day, I was the quiet, unassuming archivist. By night, I was the forensic accountant of a life lived in deceit. I drank copious amounts of tea, the stack of printed evidence on my dining table growing taller and more damning with each passing day. I lost weight. There were dark circles under my eyes. But I was not tired. I was fueled by a cold, righteous energy. This was not about revenge in the hot-blooded sense. It was about justice. It was about truth. It was about taking the chaotic, painful mess she had made and imposing order upon it. I was in essence archiving her downfall. The final piece of the puzzle was the law. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a professional, someone who could take my meticulously organized archive of evidence and weaponize it within the legal system. Finding the right lawyer was critical. I didn't want a bulldog, a shark who would be loud and aggressive. I needed someone who mirrored my own approach. Calm, intelligent, and detail-oriented. Someone who would appreciate the quality of the archive I had built. I researched small claims and civil litigation lawyers in my city. I read reviews, looked at their case histories. I made a short list of 3. The first one I consulted was dismissive. He was an older man in a stuffy office who seemed more interested in the clock on the wall than in my story. A loan to a friend? With no contract, he said, sighing. It's a he said, she said situation. Very difficult to prove intent. And she's in another country? Forget it. You'll spend more on legal fees than you'll ever get back. My advice? Write it off as an expensive life lesson. I left his office feeling deflated, but not defeated. He hadn't even looked at my evidence. He had seen a scorned woman, not a prepared litigant. He was wrong. The second lawyer was a woman named Ms. Anya Sharma. Her office was modern and minimalist. She was younger with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I sat down opposite her, my heavy binder of evidence on my lap. I started my story from the beginning, my voice steady and calm. I laid out the 15-year friendship, the tearful phone call, the bank transfer. I then explained her disappearance and my subsequent discovery of her new life online. As I spoke, I saw a flicker of interest in her eyes. She wasn't just listening, she was analyzing. When I finished, she leaned forward. You said you have evidence. It was my cue. I opened the binder on her desk. I started with the bank statement and the unanswered texts. Then I turned the page to the first photo from the Gilded Wanderer account. I walked her through my spreadsheet, my ledger of lies. I showed her the cost analysis of the villa, the restaurants, the retreats. I explained the metadata I had preserved, the geotags that corroborated her location. I spoke for 20 minutes, methodically presenting my case. When I was done, a slow smile spread across Miss Sharma's face. It wasn't a smile of pity. It was a smile of professional appreciation. Miss Jensen, she said, her voice crisp with excitement. This is extraordinary. Most clients come in here with a handful of angry texts and a lot of feelings. You've come in with a prosecutor's case file. You've documented fraudulent inducement from start to finish. Her Instagram isn't just evidence of her spending the money. It's evidence of her state of mind. The captions about taking risks and following dreams right after she took your money, a good judge will see that for what it is. A complete lack of intent to ever pay you back. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, of validation. Someone else saw it. Someone else understood. The fact that she's in Bali is a complication, Ms. Sharma continued, her mind already working through the logistics. But not an insurmountable one. We can't just sue her in a local court. But we can explore options. We can file a suit here, get a judgment in her absence, and then work with international legal channels to enforce it. But before that, we can try something much simpler. What's that? I asked. We serve her, she said, her eyes gleaming. We find out exactly where that villa is, and we hire a local service in Bali to walk right up to her, poolside cocktail in hand, and serve her with a legal summons from a jurisdiction she thought she'd left behind. The psychological impact of that alone, it will be immense. She thinks she's untouchable in her paradise. We are about to prove her wrong. I left Miss Sharma's office that day feeling 10 feet tall. The archivist had found her legal counsel. The plan was no longer just a collection of data on my hard drive. It was a living, breathing strategy. The Gilded Wanderer was blissfully unaware, posting photos of sunsets in smoothie bowls, living a life built on a foundation of lies. She didn't know that halfway across the world, a quiet archivist and a sharp-eyed lawyer were about to send a tidal wave of reality crashing into her tropical fantasy. The first drops of rain were about to fall on her parade. The legal process, much like archiving, is a creature of patience and procedure. It does not move with the speed of emotion, but with the deliberate, grinding pace of the system. Ms. Sharma was the master of this system. She took my raw emotional data and forged it into the cold, hard steel of a legal complaint. The document she drafted was a work of art in its own right. It laid out the facts with chilling precision, the long-standing friendship establishing a basis of trust, the specific misrepresentations made during the phone call, the transfer of funds under false pretenses, and the immediate subsequent flight from the country. And then came the exhibits. Exhibit A. A certified copy of my bank statement. Exhibit B. Screenshots of our text message history. And then the main event, Exhibit C through Z and beyond. Each exhibit was one of Chloe's Instagram posts, printed in full, vibrant color. Each photo of her lavish life was presented as direct evidence of the misuse of funds and the fraudulent intent behind the loan. Her own words, her own captions about being blessed and living the dream, were quoted verbatim as proof of her callous disregard for the emergency she had fabricated. The binder, once my private project, was now a formal legal document, ready to be filed with the court. The beauty of this, Ms. Sharma explained to me, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a photo of Chloe doing a yoga pose on the beach, is that she is her own chief witness against herself. We don't need to find disgruntled employees or a spurned client. She has gleefully and publicly provided a detailed confession of her actions. She just didn't realize she was confessing. The first major hurdle was locating her for service of process. A lawsuit is only real if the defendant is officially notified of it. Her Instagram was a breadcrumb trail, but we needed a precise physical address. The villa I had identified was a strong lead, but we needed to be certain. This is where Ms. Sharma's resourcefulness came into play. She hired a private investigator, not in our city, but a small, discreet agency based in Jakarta that had operatives in Bali. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I imagined a man in a linen suit, sitting in a warung across the street from Chloe's villa, watching her come and go. The reality was likely more mundane, involving database searches and a few well-placed phone calls. Within a week, the investigator confirmed it. Chloe V., also known as Chloe Peterson, was indeed a long-term resident at the Anandasari Luxury Villas, Villa number 7. He provided us with the address, a detailed description of the property layout, and even the name of the local process serving company he would recommend. With the complaint filed and her location confirmed, the moment had come. Ms. Sharma arranged everything. The legal documents were digitized, sent securely to the Balinese company, who then printed them and prepared them for delivery. We chose a specific day, a Wednesday afternoon Bali time. I knew from her posting habits that this was often when she would post a midweek motivation photo, usually from the villa's pool. I wanted the intrusion of reality to be as jarring as possible. On that Wednesday I couldn't work. I sat at my desk at the library, surrounded by the silent, dusty ghosts of the past, but my mind was 12,000 kilometers away, in the tropical heat of Indonesia. I imagined the scene playing out. The process server, a local man probably, walking through the lush grounds of the villa complex. The sound of cicadas, the scent of frangipani. He would knock on the door of villa number 7, and Chloe, perhaps annoyed at the interruption to her sunbathing, would answer. Around 4 a.m. my time, which would have been 4 p.m. in Bali, I received an email from Ms. Sharma. The subject line was simple: service complete. Attached was a short, formal report from the Balinese company, and a single photograph. The report stated that one Ms. Chloe Peterson had been personally served with the legal documents at 3:47 p.m. local time. She had accepted the papers. The photograph was a grainy, long-distance shot, likely taken by the process server as proof of service. It showed Chloe standing in the doorway of her villa, wearing a bikini and a silk robe. She was holding a thick manila envelope, her face a mask of utter uncomprehending shock. Her mouth was slightly open, the confident, curated smile of the gilded wanderer completely gone. In that one blurry image I saw the first crack in her fortress. The real world had arrived at her door. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of a ghost. It was the silence of a cornered animal. For 2 full days her Instagram was dark. No new posts, no stories. I imagined her in that villa, the legal documents spread out on a table, the stark, undeniable truth of my claim laid bare next to her half-empty coconut water. I imagined her frantic phone calls to her parents, to anyone who would listen. The carefully constructed piece of her paradise had been shattered. On the 3rd day my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize with an international country code. I knew it was her. I let it ring, my heart pounding a steady rhythmic drum against my ribs. It went to voicemail. A minute later, a barrage of text messages began to appear. Alara, what the hell is this? A lawsuit? Are you insane? I was going to pay you back. Things just got complicated. You've ruined everything. Do you know what this will do to me? We were friends. How could you do this to a friend? That last message, how could you do this to a friend, was the one that broke through my calm. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. She who had performed the ultimate act of friendship betrayal was now trying to wield that same friendship as a shield. I did not reply. Responding would be to engage with her on an emotional level, to step back into the role of the hurt friend. I was no longer that person. I was a plaintiff. I took screenshots of every message and forwarded them to Ms. Sharma with the simple note. As expected. Her official response came a week later, through a lawyer she had hastily hired in my city. It was a document full of bluster and denial. The money was the gift, it claimed. There was never any expectation of repayment. My lawsuit was a malicious and vexatious act of a jealous, spurned friend. Ms. Sharma laughed when she read it. A gift? That's the best they can do, she said over the phone. That's a defense of desperation. And we have the text messages where you discussed it as a loan. Not to mention her promises to pay you back from just a few days ago. She is tripping over her own lies. The next step was discovery, the phase where both sides exchange evidence. Her lawyer demanded any and all correspondence between us. We happily provided it. In return, we demanded her bank statements from the moment she received my money. We knew what they would show. No large incoming payment from a client, only a $50,000 deposit from me, followed by a flurry of expenditures on flights, villa rentals, and high-end restaurants in Bali. This was the part of the process that truly exposed her. Being confronted with a lawsuit is one thing. Being legally compelled to turn over the financial records that prove the lawsuit's claims is another. The legal system was now peeling back the Instagram filter, and the reality beneath was not pretty. Ms. Sharma proposed a deposition, a formal videotaped interview where I would get to ask Chloe questions under oath. Because of the distance, it would have to be conducted over a video conference with lawyers present on both sides. Chloe's lawyer fought it, of course, but the judge, having reviewed our initial evidence, compelled her to appear. The day of the deposition was the first time I had seen her face her real, uncurated face in almost a year. She appeared on the large screen in Ms. Sharma's conference room, looking pale and drawn. She was in a sterile office somewhere, not her sun-drenched villa. She was wearing a severe-looking blazer, a pathetic attempt to look professional and serious. The carefree, gilded wanderer was gone. In her place was a tired, angry woman who was finally facing a consequence she couldn't filter away. Ms. Sharma conducted the questioning, but the questions were mine. We had prepared them for weeks. She began gently, establishing the facts of our friendship, her financial situation before the loan. Chloe's answers were clipped, sullen. Then Ms. Sharma brought out the first exhibit. Miss Peterson, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit C. Do you recognize this photograph? On the screen, a picture of Chloe on the black sand beach appeared. She flinched. It's a photo from my Instagram, she mumbled. And the caption here, Miss Sharma continued, her voice even. It reads, trading my desk chair for a shoreline. Best decision I ever made. This was posted 1 week after my client transferred $50,000 to you for what you described as a business emergency that threatened to ruin your reputation. Can you explain how this trip to Bali was related to that business emergency? Chloe stammered. I was scouting locations for future projects. I see, Miss Sharma said, without a trace of belief in her voice. And Exhibit D, this photo of you at a restaurant called La Favela. The caption reads, another day, another dollar spent on amazing food. Was this a business expense, Ms. Peterson? I have to eat, she snapped, her composure cracking. Ms. Sharma continued, relentless and methodical. For 2 hours, she walked Chloe through her own Instagram feed. Each photo was a nail in her coffin. The yacht party, the designer handbag, the wellness retreat. With each question, Chloe's lies became more desperate, more transparent. She claimed the yacht belonged to a friend, that the handbag was a gift, that the retreat was for networking. But under the calm, persistent pressure of the questioning, her stories unraveled. The final blow came when Miss Sharma presented her with her own bank statements, which we had finally received. Miss Peterson, these are your financial records for the month after you received the funds from my client. Can you please point to the transaction showing payment to the graphic designers you claimed were on the verge of suing you? There was a long, heavy silence. Chloe stared at the document on her screen, her face ashen. There was no such transaction. There was only a charge for a one-way ticket to Denpasar, a wire transfer to a Balinese rental agency, and a long list of charges from the bars, boutiques, and bistros of paradise. She looked up, not at Miss Sharma, but directly into the camera. For a moment, I felt she was looking at me. Her eyes were filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and desperation. The mask was completely gone. All that was left was the ugly truth. I don't have to answer that, she whispered. Her lawyer quickly interjected and ended the deposition. But it was too late. The damage was done. We had it all on video. We had it all in writing. We had her, trapped in a web of her own creation. The deposition was a disaster for her, and she knew it. The unraveling was almost complete. The aftermath of the deposition was swift. Chloe's carefully constructed world, already fractured by the initial lawsuit, was now collapsing in on itself. Her lawyer, a man who was clearly working with an impossible client and an indefensible case, contacted Ms. Sharma within a week. His tone had changed. The bluster was gone, replaced by a weary pragmatism. He wanted to discuss a settlement. They know they've lost, Ms. Sharma told me, a note of triumph in her voice. The deposition was the nail in the coffin. She perjured herself 6 times, and her lies are all documented on video. Going to trial would be a public immolation for her. They want to make this go away, quietly and quickly. The negotiation was, from my perspective, simple. I had only one demand. I wanted my money back. All of it. $50,000. I wasn't interested in punitive damages or emotional distress claims. I didn't want to profit from this. I wanted to be made whole. I wanted to erase the financial wound she had inflicted. The emotional wound would take longer to heal, but the money was a tangible starting point. Ms. Sharma added her own condition. Chloe would also be responsible for all of my legal fees. The cost of the lawyer, the private investigator in Jakarta, the process server in Bali, all of it would be on her. It was a matter of principle. The cost of justice should be borne by the person who made it necessary. Chloe's lawyer pushed back, of course. They offered $20,000, then $35,000. They claimed she didn't have the money, that she was in debt, that my lawsuit had ruined her prospects. Ms. Sharma's reply was ice cold. Your client's financial mismanagement is not my client's problem. She seemed to have no issue funding a 6-month holiday in a tropical paradise. Perhaps she can sell her designer handbags. Our offer is not a starting point for negotiation. It is our final position. $50,000 for my client, plus full reimbursement of our legal costs. If she refuses, we will see her in court. And we will be showing the judge the video of her deposition. It was the perfect checkmate. The threat of making that deposition public was more powerful than any legal argument. Her entire Gilded Wanderer persona, her brand, was built on an illusion of effortless success and spiritual enlightenment. The image of her squirming and lying under oath would shatter that illusion forever. She couldn't afford for the world, and especially her online followers, to see the ugly reality behind the filter. 2 days later, they accepted our terms. The settlement agreement was another document I will keep forever in my personal archive. It was a confession in legal form, a full capitulation. It stipulated a wire transfer to my account for the full amount, to be completed within 10 business days. I remember the morning the money arrived. I was at work, cataloging a collection of letters from a World War I soldier to his wife. The letters were full of mundane details, but also profound love and fear. They were real. I checked my online banking app during my lunch break, almost as an afterthought, and there it was. A pending deposit.
$52,000.
I didn't feel a rush of triumphant joy. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate. Instead, a profound, quiet sense of relief washed over me. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from my chest. A weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying. It was the feeling of restoration. The numbers in my account were back where they should be. Order in one small corner of my life had been restored. That evening, out of a final lingering curiosity, I looked up the Gilded Wanderer on Instagram. The account was gone. Not private, not scrubbed, but completely deleted. Vanished. It was as if she had never existed. Her fantasy world, built with my money and her lies, had been dismantled and packed away. I imagined her having to sell her things, to leave her luxury villa, the Bali dream turning into a nightmare of debt and consequence. I didn't know where she went, and I found that I didn't care. Her story for me was over. The cathedral of our friendship was still in ruins. The money couldn't rebuild that. Some things once broken can never be truly repaired. The betrayal left a scar, a permanent mark on my ability to trust so freely. But I was not the same person who had been so easily duped. I had walked through the fire of that betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. I had learned to channel my quiet nature not into passive observation, but into deliberate action. I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience born of meticulousness and a cold, clear-eyed demand for the truth. I did not get my friend back. I had lost her long before the money ever changed hands. What I got back was my security, my self-respect, and a hell of a story. I had taken her chosen weapon, the perfectly curated image, and turned it against her. I had used her own narrative to deconstruct her, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the undeniable facts. And for an archivist, there is no more satisfying victory than that. The truth, filed away and correctly labeled, is its own form of justice. The stories we carry are often shaped by the actions of others, but the endings are ours to write. Trust is a fragile thing, and in a world where reality can be so easily filtered and curated, discerning the truth has become an art form in itself. The line between a friend in need and a predator in disguise can sometimes be heartbreakingly thin. So I leave you with this question. Have you ever had a moment where your intuition told you one thing, but your loyalty to someone told you another? A time when you had to choose between the history you shared with a person and the hard facts presenting themselves in the now? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. The strength we find in sharing these experiences is a powerful thing. It reminds us that we are not alone in our battles. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to her revenge arc for more stories of justice, resilience, and the quiet, unyielding power of a woman who has decided to reclaim her narrative. Thank you for listening.